technology on our regular tactile technology Thursday. And recently I've done quite a lot of interviews, but then I thought, well, I've actually not told anybody about myself. So I thought I'd do a self interview if you are up for that. So a little bit of background. So I'm originally from Yorkshire. So I know the accent doesn't sound very strong, but when I was younger, I had a very strong Yorkshire accent. I come from an area near Rotherham and Doncaster in South Yorkshire. I born and bred there. When I was about 17 and a half, I decided to join the Royal Air Force and I became a flight simulator engineer, which was quite unusual because my plans were I wanted to be a pilot, like everybody wanting to join the RAF wants to be a pilot. But the trouble was I didn't really fit the scheme at the time. Having a very strong Yorkshire accent, coming from a working class background, wasn't the best thing when you want to sit and have pink gins in the mess. Back in the 1970s and early 80s. It's very different now, so not quite so much of an issue. So I went to the actual careers information office and sat down with them and said I want to join the RAF. I want to do something technical. I was doing my A levels at the time, and I was very science focused. Maths, physics, and chemistry were the key areas, and quite a lot of work around engineering as well at O level. And so I wanted to really do something in that engineering space. So I did some aptitude tests and they came back and said, we've got the trade for you. And they called it LTEC ST, so Electronic Technician Synthetic Trainer. And at that time, I had no idea what a synthetic trainer was. So this is, what in the trade people call a flight simulator. So flight simulation, so a full cockpit on some kind of hydraulic infrastructure, or sometimes fixed. Not all flight sims move. Some with visuals, some without, and then all the computing and software pieces behind it. So first of all, I did my ground training, learning how to be an RF airman. So all the basic skills, how to look after uniform, shooting, all the bit of square bashing, learn how to march and do all that kind of things. And that was done at RF Swinderby, not too far from people like places like Lincoln, out in the Wolds and everything there. And then off to my ground training where I did all the basics of computing, flight envelope, understanding aircraft and how aircraft fly, and did all that before on my first simulator. First simulator I went on was quite interesting because it was an analog simulator, so it was using things like servos and feedback loops to actually do mathematical calculations and using that information to actually simulate flight. So quite different to what we see today with most computerized flight simulator systems. And that was for the BAC Lightning. So some of you may remember the BAC Lightning, so the one with two engines, one above the other, and it could take off and go off vertical near until it ran out of fuel or oxygen, whichever came sooner. It was predominantly the fuel that ran out before it ran out of oxygen. So worked on that for 3 years, and then I went on to Hercules, a much more modern designed simulator. And then my final time on simulation directly, on the actual coalface, was on the Tornado GL1 out in Germany, and also then back in the UK, RF Marham in near Kings Lynn in Lincolnshire, in Norfolk. Sorry, near said Lincolnshire. And then final 3 years in the RF I spent teaching at the ground school RF Cosford near Birmingham, over towards Telford, and that's where I settled afterwards. I finished when all of the flight simulator trade were made redundant back in 1996. So majority of the people that were working on simulators just went home, got changed into their civilian clothes and came back as a civilian contractor working on the same simulator. But I was teaching at Cosford. There was no real role for me there when it all closed down and they finished our trade. So I went off into the wilder world of technology and computer systems. So first couple of jobs were mainly software orientated, working for two companies that are based out of the US, one from the East Coast initially for a couple of years, north of Boston, that provided software to access mainly ICL mainframe systems. And then the second company was more focused on IBM mainframe systems, a company called War Data that were based out of the Kirkland area over in Seattle. So got some time spent in the US working for them. I then worked for a company that was absorbed into. No, sorry, I went to work for IBM for a little while. Didn't quite like it. It's not quite my cup of tea, but a great institution if it works for you. But it was a bit stifling from an imaginative point of view. You can't be very creative at IBM. You're very restricted by the processes within IBM. Then I worked for Sun Microsystems, did a lot of work around application migration from different platforms, including mainframe onto Solaris platform, and predominantly in the large scale computing space with the E10Ks and F15Ks that were the large platform before people started to move into that x86 space and the smaller compute and hypervisors became popular. I left Sun in 2004 and I set up my own business, and I've been doing that ever since. But initially, it was trying to find what to do, and I did quite a bit of work helping people understand how they could communicate more effectively with other business through using electronic means, things like XML interfaces and online services. I did that for a couple of companies. One of the companies asked me to become their IT director, so I did that for a little while. They went into financial difficulties, so while I'd been there, I'd helped them build a IP telephony platform, because back in 2005, 2006, it wasn't a commonplace thing to do, but it was starting to be, like the fledgling start of it. So I built a couple of platforms for some customers. Those customers liked it. When the demise of the organisation came, I took those customers back into my business and then continued to deliver that. So the company name changed to SD Voice and Video, because we were offering voice and video services over managed connectivity, and did that until today. We still do it for some of our customers. But at the same time, I'd set up a second business delivering software as service, but it was predominantly delivering document management. And we actually called it DocZone originally. Not the most creative of names, but it seemed to fit the deal. Found quite quickly that we couldn't deploy customers fast enough using traditional Linux servers. So what we tried to do was use hypervisors. So we looked at VMware, and it was 3.5 at the time. So we started to deploy VMware to be able to use it to provision our customers more effectively. So instead of it taking anything between 3 and 6 days, depending on what kit we had to deploy a customer, we could deploy a customer in a matter of hours. So much faster to build out the customer and get them up, which is quite unique, because today, we can do it in seconds. Really, it's a very different world we are in at the moment. But we learned a lot about deploying and utilizing and operating VMware from that. So we decided in 2010 to change our approach. Instead of actually delivering a managed service effectively of document management, as a software service model, we decided to take that experience and start to sell and design infrastructure for virtualized environments, predominantly VMware at that point in time. And we've continued to do that to today. Back in 2014, we decided to actually merge the two businesses together. So we changed the name of DocZone to Tactile Technology back in 2010. So when we hit 2014, we adopted that name for both businesses together. So we have a quite eclectic range of customers, from small businesses that we provided managed connectivity and telephony to, through to large enterprises. We provide a variety of virtual infrastructure, things like storage platforms, compute platforms, network infrastructure, and the associated software and services you need to put together. So, we've continued to do that going forward. I have mentioned in the past we've done quite a bit of work with the Advanced Services Group at Aston University over the last 3 years, and we've also been looking at the marketplace and what's changing there. And what we've started to do is adopt new technologies, and one of the big ones that we saw coming a while ago, but it's still slow in its adoption by a lot of organisations, is containers and Kubernetes. So we've got a big drive there, and one of our partners had a release today of their latest version, Diamante with Spectra 3, which we think is going to make a big difference to people when they want to deploy containers and Kubernetes, because it allows them not only to deploy it on bare metal on infrastructure locally with high performance, but they can actually use the same infrastructure and same management interface to actually deploy in a public cloud and have the ability to migrate both the application workload, because you build it in a container, it's fairly straightforward then to move it between another container environment as long as they're similar and actually set up in the same way. But the ability to move the data is not quite so easy. So with Spectra 3, we've got the ability now to deploy effectively stateful applications using database or other structured data that people might want to use within them, and actually be able to move both the data and the application around if we need to make sure it's right size, so it's on the right platform at the right time. Also, the system will allow for things like giving you an idea of cost, so understanding exactly where you are from a cost perspective. And beyond that, with the ITOM AI Ops piece that we're working with OpsRamp, you can actually set alerts based on price. So if you're pricing for a particular piece of AWS or Azure, it goes beyond a certain cost metric, for that month, we can alert you on that as well. In the same way as we might alert you if there is a failure to a system as well. So it's changing the way that people start to look at how they deploy infrastructure and the kind of services they deliver with it. A lot of people have been talking about digital transformation, so actually changing the way that the organization communicates both internally with staff and also externally with customers to be effectively completely digital, rather than there being quite a lot of manual process and paper, those kind of pieces in. And what we see is containerization and the use of orchestration such as Kubernetes, which has become de facto standard there nowadays. There are other mechanisms, people using things like VMware's product to run containers, and there are also people utilizing Rancher and other orchestrators as well. But we've seen that most people are driving towards Kubernetes. It's becoming a de facto standard that makes life easier for people. Also coming out of Google, it's free of charge, there's no licensing costs, but there's no support with it as well. And that's where people like Diamanti are adding great value, because they're not only providing support for the physical infrastructure on and the management interface, but they're also for that container environment and the orchestration with Kubernetes on top of that. And that makes a big difference. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a picture about myself, my journey through technology, and it's quite interesting because this October it's 40 years since I started out in the world of work. On the 23rd of October this year, it'll be 40 years since I got on that train over to RF Swinderby and started out as an RAF engineer, doing that basic ground training and then moving on to learn about computer systems and things. And looking back 40 years, the world was such a different place. People didn't have computers in the home. There were very few computers in businesses unless you were a very large business. You could afford something like a System 36 or an IBM platform. But then, we were talking many millions and big, very large rooms to fit this type of infrastructure into. So very, very different world. If you look at most people today, they're using a multitude of computers every day, on their wrist, in their pockets, in their phone, a tablet, a computer system, and also a lot of computerization in cars and other vehicles. So it's a very different world to 40 years ago. And I've really enjoyed my journey through that as well. I think it's been very exciting, the changes we've seen in the way technology is adapted and how it's actually helped our lives as well in many ways. I'm sure people would also say it's not made things difficult as well in many ways. It's made us more contactable. It makes it difficult for our lives to shut off when we leave work, because we're always connected to the office in some way. But I've enjoyed it to this point, and I look forward to the future of technology and what technology brings. Especially some things like automation of vehicles. So these fully automated cars look quite interesting. The use of EV, electric vehicles, I think is going to be quite a big impact on the climate side of things, and I think it's going to be quite interesting going forward. But anyway, thank you very much for listening today. Tomorrow we've got our Vicada Friday. I've got one of the Vicada bullet cameras to show you, so we can go through the process of assembling it, setting it up, and actually see the quality of the camera. And this is a really good camera. So if you're interested in that space, come back tomorrow 3 o'clock for Vicada Friday. Otherwise, we start the cycle again on Monday with our Diamante Monday with the announcement of Spectra 3. We've got quite a lot of things to tell you about, and hopefully we can demonstrate from Monday on. Thanks ever so much. Bye.